Hey, I'm Jammer. So, thus far with these videos, I've predominantly stuck to graphic novels because, just to be honest, that tends to be the format that I tend to read comics the most in. This ever-growing stack behind me, and then not to mention all the books around the room, are kind of a testament to the fact that I enjoy reading books. It's because I love holding books in my hands, I love slowly working through books, it's just the format that I particularly appreciate. But, again, comics, in terms of the long history of the medium, has not always been graphic novels. And in fact, until Eisner came out with the book, I point over there because that's where my copy is, A Contract with God, graphic novel as a concept really wasn't a thing. If you look down here, you'll see the Fourth World Omnibus by Jack Kirby. Kirby, in this Fourth World epic, really envisioned the notion of the graphic novel, because he had this idea that he just had this idea of, hey, let's tell a huge epic story in comics and then bind it all together like a book. Will Eisner would really come to fruition with that in A Contract with God, but then for the most part, comics remained as individual issues or newspaper strips. And again, this channel is not so much just reviewing books for the sake of reviewing them, but talking about the medium of comics, how they work, how they operate. And this is important because, again, this is not bragging, but I have a master's degree in English. So I spent a lot of time in graduate school reading books, say, let's take an author. Vladimir Nabokov, he's one of my favorite authors. So, Laughter in the Dark is a novel. Pinin is a novel. Invitation to Beheading is a novel. Transparent Things is a novel. Lolita, you might have heard of it, is a novel. Vladimir Nabokov, in this stack of books, has a great body of work. And if you're taking just any kind of English course, you're probably going to read a lot of novels. But that's not the only mode of expression that authors have access to. And so naturally, although Nabokov was an excellent writer in terms of novels, he also wrote a buku bunch of short stories. And sometimes, in fact, his short stories are really where he shines in terms of his creativity. But this video isn't about Nabokov. This issue is going to be, hopefully, the start of a longer-running series on the channel, which is just tackling individual issues. And this is important to remember, because if I hold up, say, this New 52 Green Lantern Volume 3, this is not an independent collection. This is what's known as a bound trade of comic books. It's a graphic novel, but it's a collection of individual issues. And so when I say individual issues here, in the future, we're going to just talk about a single issue of a comic book. For instance, say, an issue of Radioactive Man, where he discovers his sidekick Fallout Boy has become an air-quote dirty hippie. Or say, this classic issue of Batman, where Batman runs in on what can only be Robin hanging himself. Or is it? I don't know. Read the book, find out. You might say, be interested in a single issue of Deadpool Illustrated, arguably my favorite Marvel book and not one of my favorite books ever. You might also enjoy Hellboy in Hell. This was an amazing series, and this is just issue 2 out of 4. You might enjoy, say, Swamp Thing by Alan Moore. Or perhaps, say, an issue of V for Vendetta. And fun fact here, that's a Hastings sticker. That's how old this particular issue is. God, I'm old. Or perhaps, say, you might be interested in an individual issue of Death. This was kind of a sort of side story of the character of Death, where she gets to live for a day, and I guarantee you we're going to talk about that, because, oh boy, if you think we've gone this far and I'm not going to talk about Neil Gaiman at some point, you clearly don't know me. Okay, so we got a huge stack of single issues here. Naturally, I'm going to be talking about any one of these cool, fun, amazing books, right? Actually, no. We're actually going to talk about a different single issue, and it's really unlike any of these other books, because what we're going to be talking about is Shirtlifter Volume 1 by Steve McIsaac. Now, if you've never heard of Steve McIsaac, that really doesn't surprise me. This is not putting down the man at all, but this man is arguably just about as indie as it gets, and I say that very carefully. Steve McIsaac is an independent artist, he's a gay man, and a lot of his work deals predominantly with the lifestyle of gay and queer men. Now, what does that have to do with anything, and what does it have to do with single issues? Well, again, when we're talking about independent comics, we really have to appreciate the fact that an individual issue of a book is really something. It's easy for DC, with all of their resources, to bind a Green Lantern book together. That's because they're DC. They know they're going to sell 1 million of these books, or close to 1 million of these books, which in turn is going to give them enough money to bind the books, which will in turn cause fans to come back and buy these bound issues. But when you're talking about an independent comic, small independent issues like this are really interesting to me. And so I definitely think they're worth talking about. And also because Steve McIsaac as an artist is somebody that I respect and admire. And I'm going to talk a little bit about him before I get to what this book is and why I think it's important. Jeepers, my sidekick Fall Out Boy's a dirty hippie. It's right there in the name. Anyway, we're not talking about Radioactive Man. We're talking about Shirtlifter Volume 1. Now, I mentioned before that Steve McIsaac is a pretty indie author, and one of the predominant reasons for this is because he's a gay man, and he produces predominantly gay comics. And this is something I'll probably dedicate more episodes to in the future, but the fact of the matter is, there aren't very many presses out there right now specifically oriented towards producing LGBTQ+ and or queer comics. And for the record, as I progress forward, I'm predominantly going to use the word queer. The only reason I'm doing that is because saying LGBTQ+ over and over again, with my speech impediment, y'all, come on, I'm trying here. I am, okay? I get it. As a pansexual guy, as a queer man, I get that queer is not always as simple or as complex as we would like it to be, but sometimes you just gotta go with practicality. Moving on. Steve McIsaac's works predominantly is centered in the real world, and it predominantly focuses on the lives of queer men. And again, while companies like DC and Marvel, and sometimes even Image and Dark Horse have produced books in which queer characters are the predominant center, their queerness is often a side point to the rest of the details of their life. And it makes sense. If you're buying a DC book, you're probably buying it because you want to watch Green Lantern fight Darkseid, or maybe you want to watch Batman fight the Flash or something like that. You're predominantly going there because you want a superhero comic book. But if you're a gay man, you might want something that kind of reflects your day-to-day reality, and this is really where a lot of independence comic comes to play. It tends to be centered far more in the mundane real world. Now, along with this series, and Shirtlifter is actually one of about 5 different issues, Steve McIsaac's work has also appeared in other collections, such as this wonderful book, No Straight Lines, edited by Justin Hall. And I really, really, really cannot recommend this book enough. If you are gay, if you are queer, if you are anywhere in the community and you would like to see yourself represented in the comics medium, I can't recommend this book enough. Also, and this is also important, books like these are really important because this is a collection of work from different authors, from people like Justin Hall, to Alison Bechdel, if you've heard of her, to, again, Steve McIsaac, who has 2 stories in this book. And so this collection can be a wonderful starting point from which to start a collection of other queer comics authors. Now, along with that, he also contributed to this book here, I Like It Like That, True Stories of Gay Male Desire. And the title, and the cover, obviously, give you an idea of what this book is about. It's a series of personal essays by various gay men about sexual experiences they've had, the way their sexual identity has formed over the years, and how they identify as gay, and how that's just helped them in their personal journeys. This collection is unique, not solely for the fact that it's a series of personal essays rather than a bunch of abstract articles about modes of being and sexuality studies, what have you, which are interesting and important, but sometimes, you just want to talk to somebody, or you just want to listen to somebody talk about their day-to-day experiences. Steve McIsaac is one of the 2 contributors in this book who contributed a comics essay. And this short story here, entitled Amanuensis, I guarantee you I mispronounced that and I apologize, but this is a story in which he actually participates in a three-way with two men who are in a relationship who both identify as bottoms. And so it's an interesting conversation about top-bottom dynamics, but then also relationship dynamics. It's actually a very deep study beneath a lot of the surface sexual material. And also, fun fact, there's one other collection of comics in here, and the title is called Evil Bear Man by Justin Hall, which includes two men dressed up like Adam West and Burt Ward, Batman and Robin, and banging each other. And it's one of the most hysterical stories I think I've ever read in my entire life. Definitely look this up. And then, if you're looking for something just a little more direct, Steve McIsaac's first book is pretty easy to track down. And, well, yeah. The title, if you can't read it, is Sticky. And, again, as the cover art suggests, what this is nothing more than a collection of gay, erotic, pornographic comics. And it's just that. There's no word balloons. If you're reading this book, it's because you want to watch men having sex. Which, again, makes it seem like there's probably no material in this book worth reading. But again, what's really interesting about the medium of comics is even sometimes in the absence of dialogue, it's about what's taking place between the panels. So don't dismiss this book just because it's erotica. You should read this book if you like comics or if you're a queer man who's interested in representations of queer men in comics. So as you can see, Steve McIsaac is pretty well established in terms of a lot of independent comic publishing, a lot of independent gay male publishing. And so while he hasn't gotten the same amount of critical notice as, say, again, books like this, that's because his work tends to be in a lot of the periphery. Like I said again, I'll get into queer representations in comic books in future videos. But right now, I want to talk a little bit about Shirtlifter and why I think you should definitely check this book out. Okay, so I've talked now a little bit about queer comics, Steve McIsaac's, his role in the comic scene. Let's discuss Shirtlifter Volume 1. Now, the story is about 32 pages long, so it's about as long as most normal individual issues tend to last. Sometimes this is referred to as a graphic novel. That's because the binding, it may not look like it, but this book is printed, or at least the exterior pages are printed on really solid paper. That's because, again, this book is a very limited run, so it really wasn't designed to last the way, say, a trade paperback was. Though, then again, if you've honestly observed a lot of trade paperbacks these days, that's a video on its own. The story of Shirtlifter is about two men, Derek and Michael. They're partners. They're currently living in the nation of Japan, and Michael is predominantly the breadwinner. He works for a high firm. It's some company. You don't know what it is, and you don't need to know what it is. But the story mostly follows the day in the life of his partner, Derek, who, as the reader continues to observe, is really dissatisfied with his life in Japan and with his current situation. He teaches at a local school, specifically teaches English either to students or just common, average, everyday Japanese citizens who want to learn the language. And so one of the interesting things about this book is while you will receive normal word balloons in English, you'll also note bits of kanji and hiragana sort of scattered throughout the book. So it's an interesting experience of being caught in the rhythm of reading English and then suddenly seeing, like, oh wait, I know that hiragana. That's ku or tsu or what have you. So that's just a little fun blurb. But anyway, we follow Derek waking up in the morning, having a brief conversation with his partner Michael. Then he has sex with another man. Then he goes to work, teaches a class. He goes to a bar to meet up with a friend. They discuss his dissatisfaction. He then goes to see a play with his partner Michael. His partner Michael then reveals that, hey, we're not actually moving. They're offering me a higher job. Derek gets extraordinarily angry with this, goes out, has sex with another man, and then comes home to discover that Michael has decided to turn down the offer, and instead they're going to move back to Los Angeles. Now, that's it. That's the whole story of Shirtlifter Volume 1. Shirtlifter number 1. And Shirtlifter #2 is not a continuation of this story. In fact, it's a collection, last time I checked, of somewhere around like 3 to 4 or 5 individual stories that aren't really connected in any way. So, Shirtlifter, in this sense, is not an ongoing series. Again, I'll just point it out because I'm becoming obsessed with them lately, like Green Lantern, where this is Green Lantern #3, so it's going to collect issues from Green Lantern 13 through 20. This is one book by itself, and that's partly one of the reasons why I wanted to do this one as just a book to talk about an individual issue. What's unique about Shirtlifter is you really see how Steve McIsaac manages to play with the form of comics. Because, again, there's lots of little things done in this book. Now, I have to be careful because while there is some aspects of nudity, the most you'll probably see is a butt. Now, if you are morally opposed to seeing a butt, this video might not be for you. So, I'm going to give you this opportunity now. I'm going to show you a page. If you don't like butts, go ahead and turn the video off. No judgments. Are they gone? Okay. So, looking at just one page of the book, we see Keith just basically going about his day after his partner Michael leaves work. And as you can see here, we have a basic 12-panel structure. Each of these panels is of the exact same shape. Each of these panels has Keith in the central shot. And this is sort of what's known as a kind of like a sequence-to-sequence shot, where we're not watching Keith slowly close his laptop or slowly work on his laptop. We see just little bits of him moving from, hey, I'm on my laptop, I'm going to turn it down, turn it off, going to make the bed, going to take a shower, going to get dressed. That's it. So at first it doesn't really seem like there's a lot going on, but this sequence does give notice, or at least does sort of start to set the tone of what this book will be. Because most of what we've gotten at this point is Keith and Michael talking in their kitchen, domestically, talking about work, having a small disagreement. And so as we progress forward in this book, we're going to observe something very important about Keith, which is he tends to make this face a lot. Shirtlifter Volume 1 is very much a domestic drama. And I don't want to use the word drama very carefully because I don't want to say the word melodrama. This is not necessarily drama in something like, say, The West Wing, where there's a lot happening. This is far more domestic. We're watching two men who, again, seem to be very much in love, but at the same time are also struggling. Anybody who's been in a relationship knows it's difficult managing your desires with that of your partner's. For instance, if we look here at a later page, again, there's not a lot going on here in terms of play with the panel structure, but the word balloons and then their arrangement on the page, the body language of the characters all build in the sequence where Derek is arguing with Michael about not wanting to go to a play later that night. We don't have to have long dynamic shots and sort of experimental frames because the content of the book being what it is, it's going to drive how McIsaac is arranging the panels, which, for the most part, again, tends to be pretty basic sequence-to-sequence shots of people talking. This isn't a dramatic book, but it would be a mistake to sort of dismiss it as something that's not worth your time. Again, what's at play in this book is the exchange between characters and kind of an interesting power play. Because regardless of whether or not you're gay or straight, you probably have at some point experienced being in a relationship where your partner wants something and you don't. So much of the dramatic tension in this book tends to be on Derek's end, trying to balance his dissatisfaction with his life and then also be a fair partner to his partner Michael. Now, he eventually goes to the party with Michael, they see a wonderful show, and then they have a fight in the car. Now again, if you look at just this page, you don't even have to pause it and read it. You can kind of see just from this page alone the number of word balloons, the proximity of the word balloons, and how the figures are kind of cramped into the page. One of the interesting things about Steve McIsaac's work is he tends to use a lot of shadow for dramatic effect. And if you'll note this page here, and even to some extent this page here, you'll note the word balloons have suddenly stopped. Again, at this point, Michael has announced to Derek that he wants to stay in Japan, despite Derek's dissatisfaction with it, and continue on with the job. Derek responds by not saying anything. And anybody who's been in that scenario knows, ugh, that's a damn nightmare. But what's really good about this is the way McIsaac uses the panels, he uses the silences, and he uses a lot of these shadowing effects with just the characters inside of a car. We don't need much, but that's what we have. And then one last sequence that I think is really important or really interesting is, now again, don't forget, we're talking about gay men. Sometimes they have sex, sometimes butts are involved. If that ain't your thing, I'm going to pause it now so you can leave. All right, you're still in? Okay, don't forget, I warned you. All right. So, Derek, in his sort of anger and frustration, decides to kind of vent by going out, finding a guy, and topping him in a bar. Well, he meets the guy in the bar, then he takes him back to his place. Anyway, one of the most interesting pages of Shirtlifter #1 is this sex scene, because we have, at most, 4 panels, each of them more or less showing Keith dominating this man sexually. But then what's key, at least to me, and what I would argue is really interesting about McIsaac's construction in terms of this page, is allowing or leading the character through word bubbles, and then eventually ending here with this hiragana, which is iku, 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 which means I'm coming. So we literally just follow Keith talking to this man, who then occasionally will respond. And so if you're looking at this page, what's brilliant about the composition is the fact that he's effectively leading us through this sexual experience. And then finally, again, one of McIsaac's real strengths as an artist is he's able to convey a lot of emotion simply through physical actions and a lot of silence. We see here how the panels start to get wider. We start to feel the dramatic tension. Because even though Michael leaves a note that says, hey, we're going to go ahead and go back to Los Angeles, we can still feel that there's been this great distance that's widened between these two men. And even the last pages, we see just 4 empty panels of them just sitting there, not really snuggling, not really being that much affectionate with each other, just kind of being there. That's Shirtlifter #1. And again, I picked this book, 1, because I like Steve McIsaac, I like his work, I want people to notice him. And again, I've got like all of 3 views ever, so me bringing attention to the artist Steve McIsaac is kind of a dubious proposition at best. But, what I did want to at least address or leave you with is the impression of Shirtlifter and why I think it's a great comic. I'll say 1 or 2 little more things, and then I promise I'll shut up and we'll be done for the day. All right. I've talked about Shirtlifter #1. I've shown you some of the interesting visual tricks that McIsaac does in that comic book and why I think it's awesome. But I wanted to just say kind of like a little final last summation, so what? Like I said, going forward with these, I've mostly touched on graphic novels. Again, it's mostly what I have in my collection, but I'm going to try to do more solid individual issues. And the reason, again, is just my Nabokov example from earlier. You have structures like the novel, which can be weird and unique and interesting. And ultimately, the way they operate is it's a series of chapters or a series of sections interconnected together to build an overall whole. A short story is different. A short story is a smaller, contained piece that, while, yes, are often going to be contained in collections like this and then can sort of become their own experience, but for the most part, one short story is its own structure. And that's important when we talk about comics, because we have to remember that for the most part, most of the ways that people experience comics are either A, newspaper strips, in which case you get 3 or 4 panels at the most, or single issues like this. Therefore, I think it's really important to talk about these single issues because a lot of times that's the way the medium is operating. Yes, there's going to be weirdos like me who are going to fill their houses filled with these big, thick, graphic novels that are just absolutely gorgeous. And I'm totally going to report my reading of them on Goodreads and show off to my friends that, hey, I'm reading Green Lantern Volume 3. Which, actually, I'm not. I'm about to start this one, but I've got to finish a game and graphic novel. Anyway, these are important structures, but individual issues are at the heart of what makes comics so unique as a medium. And it's also, on my end as well, a lot easier sometimes to tackle just one single issue of a book and see what exactly it's doing and if it's doing anything at all. And especially with something like Shirtlifter, this is a graphic novel, this is an individual comic that not a lot of people are going to stumble across. I didn't even stumble across it until I literally just Google searched gay comics and I came up with this. So, if you can find books like this, please go out, buy them. Check your local comic book shop. Individual issues are kind of a lot more difficult to find in something like a public library, because unless it's part of a special collection, you're probably not going to find it there. But you never know. There might be a library out there somewhere which collects individual issues, in which case, check them out, look them out. But try your local comic book shop first. And on the note of Shirtlifter and Steve McIsaac, gonna plug him again if I haven't done that enough, because he's awesome and excellent and amazing. He actually has his own website. I'll post a link to it in the description section below. Though honestly and truthfully, you're probably a lot better off either going to his Instagram account, his Etsy page where you can buy like t-shirts, stickers, posters, what have you, or checking out his Twitter feed, because honestly and truthfully, he's got a lot more activity there, and you'll often see him promoting events that he will regularly attend, and often whenever there's just any kind of, I'll just say, any kind of like gay con, he will go, he'll have his books, he'll have his individual issues of Shirtlifter, and even just regular Comic Cons. He sometimes will appear at those. So definitely follow him, because like I said, he's worth it. His art is amazing. I cannot talk about this guy enough. So, I think that's it. Thank you again so much for watching. As always, whoever you are, wherever you are, I appreciate this tremendously. The fact that you're still watching these is, I consider it a great personal compliment. As always, the three big things: like, share, and subscribe. It helps me out. It also, validates me and makes me think, hey, somebody's actually liking this. And then, as always, if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, I'm happy to hear them, because, I love talking about comics. Please, talk to me. I have no friends. Kidding. I have lots of friends, or at least my therapist and mommy tell me that. Anyway, thank you again for watching. I really appreciate it. Go read some comics.